My brother slept with my girlfriend for a year, so I cut them off and kept her PC. Now their lives are falling apart.
Hey Reddit, my name's Jake, and I'm 26. I never thought I'd be writing about my personal drama on the internet, but I need to get this off my chest because the past few months have been a complete roller coaster. A while back, I discovered that my younger brother, Luke, 22, had been secretly sleeping with my girlfriend, Emma, 24, for almost a year. Yeah, you read that right, my own brother and the girl I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. It felt like my entire world shattered overnight. I cut them both off immediately, threw them out of my life, and kept the high-end gaming PC I had custom built for Emma as a birthday gift. It might sound petty, but that decision ended up being one of the most satisfying things I've ever done. Fast forward a few months, and I'm watching from the sidelines as their lives unravel while I'm slowly rebuilding mine. Here's how it all went down, from the gut-wrenching betrayal to the strange satisfaction of watching karma do its work. Growing up, my brother Luke and I were close, but there was always this underlying competition between us. I'm 4 years older, so naturally, I was supposed to be the responsible one, the role model. Luke, on the other hand, was the charming, carefree younger brother who could get away with anything. He was the golden child, athletic, outgoing, and effortlessly popular. From the moment he was old enough to walk, he was the center of attention in our family. Our parents adored him. He was the kid they'd show off at dinner parties, the one who always seemed to do everything right in their eyes. I was the quieter one, the nerd who spent more time tinkering with computers than hanging out with friends. I was into video games, coding, and anything tech-related, and while I did well in school, I never quite captured our parents' admiration the way Luke did. My dad would always be talking about Luke's latest soccer game, how he'd scored the winning goal, or how he was the most popular kid in his class. I, on the other hand, was praised for my grades and my bright future, but it always felt like an afterthought, a polite nod rather than genuine pride. Despite our differences, I always tried to look out for Luke. When he struggled with school, I'd stay up late helping him with his homework, even writing his papers when he was too lazy to do it himself. When he got caught sneaking out or skipping class, I'd cover for him, taking the blame or smoothing things over with our parents. I guess I felt this unspoken responsibility to protect him, even if he rarely showed the same loyalty in return. It was this dynamic where I was always the reliable older brother, and he was the reckless younger one who never seemed to face real consequences. Things started to change when I met Emma. We crossed paths at a mutual friends party about 2 years ago. I was 24, working as a software developer at a mid-sized tech company, and mostly focused on my career and hobbies. I wasn't really looking for anything serious, but Emma walked into my life like a breath of fresh air. She was beautiful, fiery red hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that could light up any room. But it wasn't just her looks that drew me in, it was her personality. She was smart, funny, and had a passion for gaming that matched mine. We spent that entire night talking about everything, our favorite games, bad movies we loved, and the weirdest foods we'd ever tried. It was like meeting a mirror image of myself, but in the best possible way. Emma and I started dating, and it felt like I'd finally found someone who got me. She wasn't just another pretty face, she was a gamer, a tech geek, and the kind of person I could spend hours talking to without getting bored. We'd stay up late playing co-op games, trash-talking each other, and bonding over our shared love of all things geeky. When I introduced her to my friends, they all agreed Emma was amazing, and I was lucky to have her. After about a year of dating, things were going great, and we decided to take the next step, moving in together. We found a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in the city, decorated it with a mix of her artsy style and my tech gear, and even adopted a rescue cat named Pixel, who quickly became the queen of the household. Our little life together felt perfect. We had our routines, our favorite takeout spots, and plenty of late nights spent side by side, gaming or binge-watching Netflix. For Emma's 24th birthday, I went all out and built her a custom gaming PC. It was top-of-the-line RGB lights, a powerful graphics card, and enough processing power to handle anything she threw at it. She was thrilled. It was her dream setup, and she spent hours streaming and playing her favorite games. It became our favorite hangout spot. We'd game together, talk about our days, and just enjoy each other's company. Luke, meanwhile, was drifting through life without much direction. He'd tried college for a bit but dropped out after a year, saying it wasn't for him. Since then, he'd been bouncing between part-time jobs, struggling to find something that stuck. He was living at home with our parents, and while they were still supportive, you could tell their patience was wearing thin. Luke was lost, and he didn't really know what he wanted from life. When Luke met Emma, they hit it off almost immediately. I thought it was great at first. My girlfriend and my brother getting along so well seemed like a dream. They'd play games together, crack jokes, and Luke would often come over to hang out, even when I wasn't around. I encouraged it, thinking it was good for Luke to have someone else to talk to besides me. He seemed happier when Emma was around, more engaged and less aimless. I'd catch them having deep conversations about life, gaming, and random stuff, and I was genuinely glad they were friends. But as time went on, I started to notice little things that didn't sit right. Emma was spending a lot of time texting, often late into the night. When I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd brush it off, saying it was just friends or work stuff. Luke's visits became more frequent, and there were times when I'd walk into a room, and they'd both go quiet, exchanging awkward glances that made my stomach turn. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just my insecurities getting the best of me, but the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Emma began to pull back in our relationship. She'd cancel plans, become distant, and when we were together, it felt like she was always somewhere else, distracted, disconnected, and cold. Our once regular date nights turned into rare occurrences, and the late-night gaming sessions we used to love became few and far between. Whenever I tried to talk to her about it, she'd assure me everything was fine, blaming work stress or saying she needed more space. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that our relationship was just going through a rough patch and that things would get better. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The night I found out about the affair is a night I'll never forget. It was supposed to be a normal Friday night. I'd just gotten home from work, exhausted but looking forward to a quiet evening. Emma had told me earlier that she'd be going out with some friends, so I figured I'd have the place to myself. I grabbed a beer, plopped down on the couch, and decided to game for a bit to unwind. Normally, I'd use my own setup, but tonight, I felt like switching things up. Emma's PC was just sitting there, its RGB lights glowing in the dimly lit room. I powered it on, planning to play a few rounds of our favorite game, when I noticed something odd. Emma's Discord was open, and she hadn't logged out. I could see all her recent conversations, and right at the top was a message from Luke. I hesitated for a moment. I wasn't the type to invade someone's privacy, but something compelled me to click. Maybe it was the weird vibe I'd been feeling for months or the nagging suspicion that something wasn't right. Whatever it was, I clicked on Luke's chat, and what I found made my blood run cold. The chat was filled with months of messages between them, flirty, suggestive, and way too intimate. I scrolled up, reading through lines that made my stomach churn. They'd been meeting up behind my back, sneaking around, and lying to me for nearly a year. The messages were explicit, talking about their hookups, the times they'd almost been caught, and how they needed to be more careful around me. Every line I read felt like a punch to the gut. Emma had told Luke how much she missed him, how she couldn't wait to see him again, and how guilty she felt about what they were doing. Luke responded with equal enthusiasm, making plans for their next meetup and joking about how clueless I was. It was like my entire world was collapsing around me. I felt sick to my stomach, my hands shaking as I read through every disgusting message. I couldn't believe it, my own brother and the girl I loved were betraying me in the worst possible way. I'd always been there for Luke, defending him when he messed up, covering for him when he was in trouble, and this was how he repaid me? And Emma, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, had been lying to me, using me, and laughing behind my back. I sat there, staring at the screen in disbelief. My mind was racing, flooded with a mix of rage, sadness, and humiliation. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to confront them both and demand answers. But mostly, I just felt numb. I'd never felt so betrayed, so utterly broken by the people I trusted most. I called Emma right away, my voice shaking with anger. "Emma, I need you to come home. Now." She tried to play it off, saying she was busy with friends, but I wasn't buying it. "I know," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I know everything. You and Luke. Get home now." She was back within 15 minutes, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. She knew I'd found out, and she didn't even try to lie. Emma broke down the moment she walked through the door, crying and begging for my forgiveness. She told me it had just happened, that it was a mistake, that she never meant to hurt me. But her words were meaningless. All I saw was betrayal. I felt nothing but rage and disgust. "Get out," I said, my voice cold and detached. "Pack your stuff and get out." Emma tried to plead with me, saying she was sorry, that she wanted to fix things, but I was done. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet, threw her clothes inside, and dumped it all by the door. She left, still crying, but I didn't care. I couldn't even look at her. I slammed the door behind her, blocking out her sobs. I didn't want to hear it, I just wanted her gone. Then I called Luke. He didn't answer at first, but when he finally picked up, his voice was defensive, like he already knew what was coming. I let him have it, every ounce of anger, pain, and betrayal that had been building inside me. I told him he was dead to me, that he was no longer my brother, and that I never wanted to see him again. He tried to justify it, saying it was complicated, but I hung up before he could finish. I was done. I blocked them both on everything: phone, social media, all of it. I didn't want to see their faces, hear their voices, or deal with their excuses. I deleted every photo, every memory, every trace of them from my life. It was like wiping a hard drive clean, purging all the corrupted files that had been poisoning me for so long. But there was one thing I kept: Emma's gaming PC. The custom rig I'd spent weeks building, the one she'd used to stream and play while she was lying to me. It was mine now, and I wasn't about to give it back. Kicking Emma out and cutting off Luke was one of the hardest and most liberating things I've ever done. For weeks, I felt like I was living in a foggy, numb, angry, and struggling to come to terms with everything that had happened. My apartment felt empty without Emma, and the silence was deafening. I'd lie in bed at night, replaying the past year in my head, trying to figure out how I'd missed all the signs. I was angry at them, but I was also angry at myself for being so blind. The first few days after the breakup were the worst. I'd wake up every morning with this crushing weight on my chest, like I couldn't breathe. I'd look around the apartment and see reminders of Emma everywhere: her clothes, her books, the little things she'd left behind that I hadn't had the energy to throw away. It felt like she was haunting the place, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the memories. But the anger kept me going. Every time I thought about them, I'd feel a surge of rage that pushed me forward. I wasn't going to let them ruin me. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and working long hours to keep my mind occupied. I started going to the gym more, using exercise as an outlet for my frustration. It was my way of channeling the hurt into something productive, something that would make me stronger rather than tearing me down. Emma tried to reach out multiple times after I kicked her out. She sent long, rambling texts apologizing for everything, begging for another chance, and trying to explain how lost she'd been. She even tried to play the victim, saying that she and Luke had never meant to hurt me and that they'd both been confused. I didn't respond. I had no interest in her excuses, and I didn't owe her any more of my time or energy. What really set me off was when she asked for her PC back. She sent a message saying it was the one thing she had left, that she needed it to continue her streaming and that it wasn't fair for me to keep it. I laughed when I read that. After everything she'd done, she still thought she was entitled to something from me? I told her the PC was mine now, and she could forget about ever seeing it again. Luke, on the other hand, went radio silent. I didn't hear a word from him after our final call, and honestly, that was fine by me. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved out of our parents' house, supposedly to start fresh with Emma. But things didn't go as planned. Most of our mutual friends had sided with me, cutting them off once they found out about the affair, and neither of them had much of a support system left. Emma's streaming career, which she'd been trying to build up for months, took a major hit without her gaming rig. She'd invested a lot of time and effort into her Twitch channel, slowly growing her audience and creating content that people loved. But without the PC, she was dead in the water. She tried streaming from a borrowed laptop, but it was slow, constantly crashing, and barely capable of running the games she needed. Her viewers started dropping off, her followers stopped engaging, and her once busy chat room turned into a ghost town. She tried everything, reaching out to sponsors, doing collabs with other streamers, even trying to crowdfund a new setup, but nothing worked. The streaming world is cutthroat, and without the right tools, she couldn't keep up. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, and as much as I hated her for what she'd done, there was a twisted satisfaction in seeing her struggle. Luke wasn't faring much better. He'd moved into a dingy, overpriced studio apartment that he could barely afford, working a series of low-paying, dead-end jobs just to make rent. His old charm wasn't getting him far, and he found himself stuck in a cycle of late shifts, crappy paychecks, and constant stress. The reality of his choices was hitting him hard, and it was clear that the fantasy he and Emma had built was crumbling around them. Mutual friends told me that Luke was miserable, constantly fighting with Emma, and struggling to keep his head above water. Their relationship, which had started as some sort of forbidden thrill, was now a toxic mess of blame, resentment, and regret. Emma would complain to anyone who would listen about how she missed her old life, and Luke was stuck in a downward spiral of poor decisions and even poorer consequences. Meanwhile, I was finding my way back to myself. I spent more time gaming, focusing on the things I loved, and upgrading Emma's old PC with the latest hardware. It felt good to reclaim something that had been tainted by her betrayal, turning it into a symbol of my own resilience. I started picking up freelance coding gigs on the side, building my savings, and planning for the future. I was done with being blindsided, and I was ready to take back control. As the months went on, the situation for Luke and Emma went from bad to worse. Luke lost his part-time job at a local sports bar after too many late shifts and showing up hungover. With no steady income, he couldn't afford the rent on his studio apartment, and he was forced to move back in with our parents, a humiliation that hit him harder than he'd ever admit. My parents were disappointed, to say the least. Luke had always been their golden boy, the one they expected great things from, and now he was back in their house, jobless and moping around like a lost teenager. They tried to support him, offering to help him find another job and get back on his feet, but Luke's pride wouldn't let him accept their help. He was spiraling, lashing out at everyone around him, and blaming everyone but himself for the mess he'd made. Emma, on the other hand, was bouncing between low-paying gigs, struggling to make ends meet. She tried to keep up appearances on social media, posting old photos and pretending everything was fine, but it was clear that she was barely holding it together. Without her PC, she couldn't stream consistently, and her once dedicated followers had moved on to other creators. She'd gone from being on the brink of a successful side hustle to being just another struggling streamer, lost in the noise of a crowded market. They fought constantly. Friends who still kept in touch with both of them told me that Luke and Emma's relationship was a train wreck full of arguments, blame, and mounting resentment. The thrill of sneaking around had long worn off, and now they were faced with the harsh reality of trying to make a real relationship work. Emma was frustrated with Luke's lack of direction, Luke was bitter about their situation, and both of them were too stubborn to admit that they'd made a colossal mistake. I'd hear snippets of their drama from mutual friends, how Luke was couch surfing because he couldn't stand being at home, how Emma was borrowing money from her parents to cover her bills, and how their once passionate affair had turned into a nightmare of their own making. It was like karma had finally caught up to them, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. They'd torn my life apart, and now they were paying the price. As satisfying as it was to watch Luke and Emma's lives fall apart, I knew I couldn't spend the rest of my days reveling in their misery. I had to focus on myself, on rebuilding, healing, and finding my way back to a version of myself that wasn't defined by what they'd done. I started seeing a therapist, working through the hurt and anger, and learning how to let go of the baggage they'd left behind. It was hard, but each session was like peeling back another layer of pain, exposing the raw wounds underneath and figuring out how to heal them. I threw myself into my work, putting in extra hours and tackling new projects that challenged me in ways I hadn't experienced before. My dedication paid off, and I was offered a promotion at my job, a chance to lead a new development team and work on cutting-edge projects that excited me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward, like I was reclaiming my life on my terms. Outside of work, I started picking up new hobbies, things I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. I learned how to cook, experimenting with new recipes and turning my kitchen into a makeshift restaurant. I took up rock climbing, finding solace in the physical challenge and the sense of accomplishment that came with reaching new heights. I even got back into dating, cautiously dipping my toes into the world of online apps and meeting new people. One night, I ran into one of Luke's old friends at a bar. We grabbed a drink, and he filled me in on all the latest gossip. Luke was still struggling, he'd been fired from another job, was barely scraping by, and was back living with our parents full-time. Emma had given up on her streaming dreams entirely, focusing on working odd jobs and trying to piece together some semblance of a stable life. Their relationship, if you could even call it that, was hanging by a thread. As I listened to Luke's friend talk, I realized something: I didn't care anymore. Their drama, their downfall, their pathetic attempts to piece their lives back together, it didn't affect me. I'd spent so long being angry, so long feeling like their actions had ruined me, but in that moment, I felt nothing but indifference. I'd moved on, and they were just a distant chapter in a story I was no longer interested in reading. Back at home, I'd sit at Emma's old PC, now upgraded and running better than ever, and feel a sense of pride. It wasn't just a piece of technology, it was a symbol of everything I'd been through and everything I'd overcome. I'd turned something that represented betrayal into a source of strength, a reminder that I was in control of my own narrative. I didn't need their validation, their apologies, or their presence in my life. I was better off without them. Recently, I heard that Emma had moved back in with her parents, and Luke was still bouncing between temp jobs, trying to figure out his next move. Their lives were messy, complicated, and far from the fairy tale they'd once imagined. But that was their burden to bear, not mine. I was done carrying the weight of their mistakes, done letting their actions define me. I'm sharing this story not because I need validation or sympathy, but because I want people to know that you can come back from betrayal. You can cut out the toxic people, reclaim what's yours, and build a life that's better than anything you've lost. It's not easy, and it hurts like hell, but there's something powerful about taking back control and refusing to let the people who hurt you dictate your future. As for Luke and Emma, they've got their own paths to walk, and whatever happens to them now is out of my hands. I've found my way forward without them, and I'm stronger for it.